Hello again, Junior American Lit. Today I'm going to read you the fourth Tuesday through the fifth Tuesday in Tuesdays with Maury. So that is pages 23 to 29 on the PDF copy. If you want to open it up to follow along, you can, but I'm going to have it shining up on the screen so you don't need to. You can just follow along with me as well. Make sure that you're filling out your study guide as we go, because I am also going to have you take a picture or somehow upload your answers from your study guide to Schoology so that I can give you points for your study guide. But I am going to go ahead and get started with this, if it will. There we go. Okay. So here we go. On the fourth Tuesday, we talk about death. Let's begin with this idea, Maury said. Everyone knows they're going to die, but nobody believes it. He was in a business-like mood this Tuesday. The subject was death, the first item on my list. Before I arrived, Maury had scribbled a few notes on a small white piece of paper so that he wouldn't forget. His shaky handwriting was now indecipherable to everyone but him. It was almost Labor Day, and through the office window I could see the spinach-colored hedges of the backyard and hear the yells of children playing down the street, their last week of freedom before school began. Back in Detroit, the newspaper strikers were gearing up for a huge holiday demonstration to show the solidarity of unions against management. On the plane ride in, I had read about a woman who had shot her husband and two daughters as they lay sleeping, claiming she was protecting them from the bad people. In California, the lawyers in the O.J. Simpson trial were becoming huge celebrities. Here in Maury's office, life went on one precious day at a time. Now we sat together a few feet from the newest addition to the house, an oxygen machine. Now we sat together. It was a small and portable, about knee-high. On some nights, when he couldn't get enough air to swallow, Maury attached the long plastic tubing to his nose, clamping on his nostrils like a leech. I hated the idea of Maury connected to a machine of any kind, and I tried not to look at it as Maury spoke. Everyone knows they're going to die, he said, but nobody believes it. If we did, we would do things differently. So we kid ourselves about death, I said. Yes, but there's a better approach. To know you're going to die and to be prepared for it at any time. That's better. That way you can actually be more involved in your life while you're living. How can you ever be prepared to die? Do what the Buddhists do. Every day, have a little bird on your shoulder that asks, "Is today the day? Am I ready? Am I doing all I need to do? Am I being the person I want to be?" He turned his head to his shoulder as if the bird were there now. "Is today the day I die?" he said. Maury borrowed freely from all religions. He was born Jewish but became an agnostic when he was a teenager, partly because of all that happened to him as a child. He enjoyed some of the philosophies of Buddhism and Christianity, and he still felt at home culturally in Judaism. He was a religious mutt, which made him even more open to the students he taught over the years. And the things he was saying in his final months on earth seemed to transcend all religious differences. Death has a way of doing that. "The truth is, Mitch," he said, "once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." I nodded. "I'm going to say it again," he said. "Once you learn how to die, you learn how to live." He smiled, and I realized what he was doing. He was making sure I absorbed this point without embarrassing me by asking. It was part of what made him a good teacher. "Did you think much about death before you got sick?" I asked. "No," Maury smiled. "I was like everyone else. I once told a friend of mine in a moment of exuberance, 'I'm going to be the healthiest old man you ever met.' 'How old were you?' 'In my 60s. "So you were optimistic." "Why not? Like I said, no one really believes they're going to die." "But everyone knows someone who has died," I said. "Why is it so hard to think about dying?" "Because," Maury continued, "most of us all walk around as if we're sleepwalking. We really don't experience the world fully because we're half asleep, doing the things we automatically think we have to do." "And facing death changes all that?" "Oh, yes. You strip away all that stuff and you focus on the essentials. When you realize you're going to die, you see everything much differently." He sighed. "Learn how to die, and you learn how to live." I noticed that he quivered now when he moved his hands. His glasses hung around his neck, and when he lifted them to his eyes, they slid around his temples, as if he were trying to put them on someone else in the dark. I reached over to help guide them onto his ears. "Thank you," Maury whispered. He smiled when my hand brushed up against his head. The slightest human contact was immediate joy. "Mitch, can I tell you something?" "Of course," I said. "You might not like it." "Why not?" "Well, the truth is, if you really listen to that bird on your shoulder, if you accept that you can die at any time, then you might not be as ambitious as you are." I forced a small grin. "The things you spend so much time on, all this work you do, might not seem as important. You might have to make room for some spiritual things." "Spiritual things?" "You hate that word, don't you? Spiritual. You think it's touchy-feely stuff." "Well," I said. He tried to wink, a bad try, and I broke down and laughed. "Mitch," he said, laughing along, "even I don't know what spiritual development really means, but I do know that we're deficient in some way. We are too involved in materialistic things, and they don't satisfy us. The loving relationships we have, the universe around us, we take these things for granted." He nodded toward the window with the sunshine streaming in. "You see that? You can go outside any time. You can run up and down that block and go crazy. I can't do that. I can't go out. I can't run. I can't be out there without fear of getting sick. But you know what? I appreciate that window more than you do." "Appreciate it?" "Yes, I look out that window every day. I notice the change in the trees, how strong the wind is blowing. It's as if I can see time actually passing through that window pane. Because I know my time is almost done, I'm drawn to nature like I'm seeing it for the first time." He stopped, and for a moment we both just looked out the window. I tried to see what he saw. I tried to see time and seasons, my life passing in slow motion. Maury dropped his head slightly and curled it toward his shoulder. "Is it today, little bird?" he asked. "Is it today?" Letters from the world kept coming in to Maury, thanks to Nightline appearances. He would sit when he was up to it and dictate the responses to friends and family who gathered for their letter-writing sessions. One Sunday, when his sons, Rob and John, were home, they all gathered in the living room. Maury sat in his wheelchair, his skinny legs under a blanket. When he got cold, one of his helpers draped a nylon jacket over his shoulders. "What's the first letter?" Maury said. A colleague read a note from a woman named Nancy who had lost her mother to ALS. She wrote to say how much she had suffered through the loss and how she knew that Maury must be suffering too. "All right," Maury said when the reading was complete. He shut his eyes. "Let's start by saying, 'Dear Nancy, you touched me very much with your story about your mother, and I understand what you went through. There's a sadness and suffering on both parts. Grieving has been good for me, and I hope it has been good for you also.'" "You might want to change that last line," Rob said. Maury thought for a second, and then said, "You're right. How about, 'I hope you can find the healing power in grieving.' Is that better?" Rob nodded. "And add, 'Thank you, Maury,'" Maury said. Another letter was read from a woman named Jane, who was thanking him for his inspiration on the Nightline program. She referred to him as a prophet. "That's a very high compliment," said a colleague. "A prophet." Maury made a face. He obviously didn't agree with the assessment. "Let's thank her for her high praise and tell her I'm glad my words meant something to her. And don't forget to sign, 'Thank you, Maury.'" There was a letter from a man in England who had lost his mother and asked Maury to help him contact her through the spiritual world. There was a letter from a couple who wanted to drive to Boston to meet him. There was a long letter from a former graduate student who wrote about her life after university. It told of a murder, suicide, and 3 stillborn births. It told of a mother who died from ALS. It expressed fear that she, the daughter, would also contract the disease. It went on, 2 pages, 3 pages, 4 pages. Maury sat through the long, grim tale. When it was finally finished, he said softly, "Well, what do we answer?" The group was quiet. Finally, Rob said, "How about, 'Thanks for your long letter'?" Everyone laughed. Maury looked at his son and beamed. The newspaper near his chair has a photo of a Boston baseball player who is smiling after pitching a shutout. Of all the diseases, I think to myself, Maury gets one named after an athlete. "You remember Lou Gehrig?" I ask. "I remember him in the stadium, saying goodbye." "So you remember the famous line." "Which one?" "Come on, Lou Gehrig, pride of the Yankees, the speech that echoes over the loudspeakers." "Remind me," Maury says. "Do the speech." Through the open window, I hear the sound of a garbage truck. Although it is hot, Maury is wearing long sleeves with a blanket over his legs, his skin pale. The disease owns him. I raise my voice and do the Gehrig imitation, where the words bounce off the stadium walls. Today, I feel like the luckiest man on the face of the earth. Maury closes his eyes and nods slowly. Yeah, well, I didn't say that. The 5th Tuesday, we talk about family. It was the first week in September, back to school week, and after 35 consecutive autumns, my old professor did not have a class waiting for him on a college campus. Boston was teeming with students, double parked on the side streets, unloading trunks, and here was Maury in his study. It seemed wrong, like those football players who finally retire and have to face that first Sunday at home watching on TV, thinking, I could still do that. I have learned from dealing with those players that it is best to leave them alone when their old seasons come around. Don't say anything. But then, I didn't need to remind Maury of his dwindling time. For our taped conversations, we had switched from handheld microphones because it was too difficult now for Maury to hold anything that long, to lavalier, kind of popular with the TV news people. You can clip these onto a collar or a lapel. Of course, since Maury only wore soft cotton shirts that hung loosely over his ever-shrinking frame, the microphone sagged and flopped, and I had to reach over and adjust it frequently. Maury seemed to enjoy this because it brought me close to him, in hugging range, and his need for physical affection was stronger than ever. When I leaned in, I heard his wheezing breath and weak coughing, and he smacked his lips softly before he swallowed. Well, my friend, he said, what are we talking about today? How about family? Family, he mulled it over for a moment. Well, you see mine, all around me. He nodded to the photos on his bookshelves of Maury as a child with his grandmother. Maury was a young man with his brother David, Maury with his wife Charlotte, Maury with his 2 sons, Rob, a journalist in Tokyo, and Ion, a computer expert in Boston. Ion is a typo. That should say Ron, a computer expert in Boston. I think in light of what we've been talking about all these weeks, family becomes even more important, he said. The fact is there's no foundation, no secure ground upon which people may stand today if it isn't the family. It's become quite clear to me as I've been sick. If you don't have the support and love and caring concern that you get from family, you don't have much at all. Love is so supremely important. As our great poet Auden said, love each other or perish. Love each other or perish. I wrote it down. Auden said that? Love each other or perish, Maury said. It's good, no? And it's true. Without love, we are birds with broken wings. I say I was divorced or living alone or had no children. This disease, what I'm going through, would be so much harder. I'm not sure I could do it. Sure, people would come visit, friends, associates, but it's not the same as having someone who will not leave. It's not the same as having someone whom you know has an eye on you, is watching you the whole time. This is part of what family is about. Not just love, but letting others know there's someone who is watching out for them. It's what I missed so much when my mother died, what I call your spiritual security, knowing that your family will be there watching out for you. Nothing else will give you that. Not money, not fame. He shot me a look. Not work, he said. Raising a family was one of those issues on my list, things you want to get right before it's too late. I told Maury about my generation's dilemma with having children, how we often saw them as tying us down, making us into these parent things that we did not want to be. I admitted to some of these emotions myself. Yet when I looked at Maury, I wondered if I were in his shoes about to die and had no family, no children, would this emptiness be unbearable? He had raised 2 sons to be loving and caring, and like Maury, they were not shy with their affection. He has so desired they would have stopped what they were doing to be with their father every minute of his final months, but that was not what he wanted. Do not stop your lives, he told them. Otherwise, this disease will have ruined 3 of us instead of 1. In this way, even as he was dying, he showed respect for all of his children's worlds. Little wonder when they sat with him, there was a waterfall of affection, lots of kisses and jokes, crouching by the side of the bed, holding hands. Whenever people ask me about having children or not having children, I never tell them what to do. Maury said, now looking at a photo of his oldest son, I simply say, there is no experience like having children. That's all. There's no substitute for it. You cannot do it with a friend. You cannot do it with a lover. If you want to experience the complete responsibility for another human being and to learn how to love and bond in the deepest way, then you should have children. Okay, that's all I have time for because this is going to cut me off in 5 seconds. But you have to read this part